Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to the Lloyd's Register ISO 45001 webinar. Today's webinar will feature a panel discussion with 4 health and safety experts. My name is Alex Briggs, and I am the Global Head of Brand and Communications with Lloyd's Register. Let me start out by describing the format of today's webinar. I will be the moderator for today's session, and during the session, questions will be posed for our panelists, and each of the topics will then be discussed amongst the 4 experts. Audience questions will follow the discussion, with any unanswered questions being followed up by a member of our team. So let's start off by introducing our 4 panel experts today. To start off with, from Lloyd's Register, Martin Cottam.
Hello everyone. I'm Lloyd's Register's Group Technical Assurance and Quality Director with overall responsibility for technical governance and quality management across the organisation. But I'm contributing today because of my involvement in OHS standards development. I've been involved for over 20 years in the British Standards Committee for OHS management, from the time I was originally involved in setting up Lloyd's Register's own OHS certification offering. I chaired the British Standards Committee through the period in which ISO 45001 was being developed and acted as led the UK's delegation during that time, and then was appointed chair of the ISO Technical Committee 283, responsible for OH&S management, and I've chaired that committee for the last 2.5 years.
Thank you, Martin. Also from Lloyd's Register, we have Suzanne Laskiewicz.
Hi there, I'm Suzanne. I'm a management system assessor. I cover a variety of standards, including 9001, 14001 and 45001. My base sector is oil and gas, energy. I also cover construction activities, a little bit of food industry, food sector, but also engineering and the like. Been with Lloyd's now for coming up for 11 years, management systems assessor the whole time.
Thank you, Suzanne. And now we'll move on to Donna Hutchison. Donna is with Quench, Health, Safety, Environmental and Quality Specialists.
Thanks, Alex. My name is Donna Hutchison, and I'm a director of Quench HSEQ Specialist, which is a health, safety, environmental and quality consultancy. We are based in Aberdeen in the northeast of Scotland, and also an office in Perth, Western Australia, covering the Asia Pacific region. Wide range of services across the HSEQ disciplines, covering auditing, consultancy and training. Quench has been established since 2006 and has had significant involvement in management system development, most recently with the transition from 18001 to 45001.
Thanks, Donna. And last but not least, Craig Hunter from the ASCO Group.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. So I'm Craig Hunter. I'm the Group Head of HSSEQ for ASCO Group. I'm a chartered health and safety professional. I've been in this role with ASCO for 7 years. I'm a safety professional for 17 years. Today, I just want to sort of join the seminar to share our experience of having an integrated management system and share some of the learning that we've had from implementing that into our business.
Craig, thank you very much. And now, just before we dive into the questions, a short note on an overview of our topic today. So, as you all know, work environments have changed for the foreseeable future and perhaps even permanently, with some employees working remotely while others are able to travel and even go on site. So ISO 45001, the Global Health and Safety Management System, is designed to ensure organizations consider everything that can have an impact on their workers as well as other interested parties. All right, so if we start off with our very first question, the first question for today's panelists are, what are the key differences between OSAS 18001 and ISO 45001? Martin, if I could start off with you, please.
Thank you, Alex. I think one of the most significant differences relates to worker participation. And I think to understand why that change is there in the standard compared to OSAS 18001, it's useful to understand a little bit around the provenance of those two different standards. OSAS 18001, as many people will know, was developed by a group of stakeholders who were keen to see there come into being a standard for OH&S management at a time when there wasn't sufficient consensus at ISO level to develop such a standard. And I think we'd all acknowledge that they did a pretty good job in bringing together that first standard. But there is quite a difference when you look at 45001 in terms of the range of stakeholder involvement that was possible once we're talking about development of a full ISO standard. And perhaps the biggest difference there is the level of participation from stakeholders who represent workers and the interests of workers. And that really has played through, I think, into much stronger requirements in 45001 in relation to worker consultation and worker participation in decision making.
Yeah, I think I can add to that from Martin's perspective. I would definitely echo the worker and worker participation element. I think the experiences that we have with our client base is there is a greater focus on health. So while 18001 was the occupational health and safety standard, there was still a significant focus around the personal and operational safety elements. And I think what 45001 has done has evened that up. So there is now as much focus on health as there is on safety, and particularly around the worker participation elements of health, rather than just the physical safety attributes.
Yeah, I would add to that two points. I think there's a couple of things that really stand out for me from the differences between 18,000 and 45,001. The first one is the greater senior management involvement. So historically, people like myself, who would be the health and safety lead for the organisation, would be driving the management system, going to them saying, "Can we have this? Should we do this?" It is now changed to this control from the senior management team. So having that commitment from these guys is really important to make sure that actually that comes to bear on the management system. I guess the other sort of spin-off from that piece that I don't think it was intended from 45,001, but it certainly helped us enormously in the development of a positive safety culture. So where we're looking now at setting the targets and the performance achievements for the business, they're actually coming from the board and not from Craig, which is a massive shift, which is quite important to acknowledge.
Great, thank you all very much. If we move on to the next question, and Suzanne, this one I'll start with you. Can you tell us what are the key challenges organizations face that you've seen as organizations move to ISO 45001?
Absolutely. I've tapped into some data that we've managed to glean from our system in relation to non-conformities that have been raised and trending around those. Some of the key areas we've taken kind of top 5, and I'll just follow through just from the information I've retrieved here. So 8.1, operational planning and control, is coming out as one of the big hitters in terms of number of non-conformities raised, certainly, which would be indicative of challenge within the development of the occupational health and safety system. Now, I've taken a little bit of a personal slant on it in terms of what I've seen specifically, so making it a little bit more bespoke in terms of the response. So 813, which is around management of change. So challenges in managing occupational health and safety risk are acknowledged. The challenge is even more so when change is presented. And what I consistently see is where there is a significant change, it's an opportunity for revisiting those risk profiling exercises, context analysis, and the associated mitigation that needs to be put in place. It's certainly one of the key things that I think that a lot of organisations are seeing challenge with, having a robust and repeatable process around that management of change piece. Also identified 6.1 risks and opportunities. Again, perspective around this is around the context analysis. I kind of do hark back to it, but revisiting that initial context analysis piece using a recognised model, and certainly there's loads out there. SWOT is a good basic one, PESTLE is better. It gives an opportunity for organisations to really hone in on those risks, but particularly opportunities. As Donna mentioned earlier about the kind of focus around safety in a health and safety management system, the risks and opportunities piece, opportunities I've seen tend to get a little bit of less of a focus, and really I think a lot of the findings that we're seeing are coming out from there. Monitoring and measurement is also a really interesting challenge that I think organisations face, and it's not just about your high level, you know, your objective settings. It's about each process. What monitoring and measuring activities can you demonstrate that each process, which is feeding into the bigger machine of delivery, is working effectively? Interesting. We've also seen emergency responses as coming up as a high number of non-conformities from assessments against 45001. There may be something around engagement of interested parties in that process. It could also come around from the fact that there is changes evident, particularly in the current climate that we're in. COVID obviously is posing a global challenge. Part of their emergency response may have to be modified in terms of, as an example, first aiders. First aiders' approach will have to change, even for an interim period. And it's about, I suppose, organisations keeping in step with that context analysis for their changing environment. And touching back, again, what Martin and Donna spoke about there in terms of that communication and consultation and participation piece, it is a change in terms of the expectation and emphasis about worker participation. There's always been a level of communication that's been clear to see. Communications comes from the business leaders consistently. Happy to see that. Participation and consultation can sometimes be more difficult to demonstrate, particularly where it's, you know, that participation and consultation to do with policy objective setting, as opposed to kind of demonstrating that robust worker community engagement.
Yeah, I think to add to Suzanne, I think one of the key challenges we see is it's very much dependent if an organisation is going from 18,001 to 45,001, or if it's looking at 45,001 from scratch, you know, with no previous 18,001 system. So certainly our experience has been where we go through that transition piece. Certainly working with the likes of Lloyd's Register, the management system assessors are there to kind of drip feed that transition. So you go through your actual transition audit, but there's a lot of discussion with your Lloyd's Register assessor prior to that about key areas. And I think it echoes partly back to what Craig was saying in the answer to the previous question, is it moves the standard away from being a health and safety department activity. It's far more about how health and safety is integrated into the overall business or organisation, and particularly around the risk-based thinking approach that we saw introduced with 9001 in the 2015 version.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that, I guess, when we look at the challenges of you know, organisations migrating to 45,001, you know, a lot of organisations go, well, first thing is, well, why would we do it? You know, what's wrong with what we've got? So there is a piece there. You have to go back to the organisation and help them to understand why it's such a good thing. So there is a lot of selling to be done to the board to make sure they understand why you're going to move from one, as they see, a perfectly good standard to this new standard. Now, for myself, that was quite easy because we operate in 6 different countries worldwide. We now have an international standard that has the right terminology across all the pieces that we can actually utilise. So it helped them enormously. So in terms of, you know, we obviously have to say that there's a cost to it. We have to explain that to the board, what that's going to be, and then to think about what the benefit will be. So to actually reduce the amount of policies and procedures and documents within your management system, because you now have an international standard with using the right terminology, we can actually apply that much more effectively. So some of the other challenges that we found as an organisation were really about, even including managing client expectations. So clients are expecting us to be at the forefront of getting new standards when that happens. So we have to make sure that we're in a position to be ready to do these sorts of things. So I guess, summarising all that, it's really about, how do we prepare for the migration, and how do we make sure the business is ready for it and make that as seamless as possible. So that was the kind of key challenges that we had, certainly within our boardroom.
Suzanne, Donna, Craig, very insightful. Thank you very much. And Craig, you've actually started to pick up on my next question. My next question is specifically around that. How do you prepare for an ISO 45001 audit?
Yeah, so I guess I'll share our experience again at ASCO. So there's two strands to this. So the first one is to engage with your certificate company, sorry. If we don't engage with them and get a partnership working with Lloyd's Register, then you're going to struggle. We've been very fortunate. We've been with Lloyd's, I think, since 1996. All that way through. So all the changes to our standards have been continuous. So I guess in terms of our preparation, our assessors had a great insight into our business anyway. So that's a really good starting point. You cannot turn down the opportunity to do the gap analysis that is offered, because there are parts of your existing management system that are absolutely excellent. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You want to make sure you retain all the good stuff, but make sure you align to the new standards. So there's a huge amount of work from engagement with Lloyd's. And once you've actually done that, I certainly wouldn't make it too onerous, but you can certainly put together a small action plan with some key milestones along the way. So, how do we engage with the business? How do we understand where we're going to be at? What are the key points we need to be at? And I guess the second part in the preparation, which I kind of touched on in the previous question, is how do you prepare your business for it? How do you get the business ready for this move? So, for us, it started way back at our last management review meeting. So we have a review of standards, what's coming down the track, what it will mean to us. And I shamelessly hijacked that part of the meeting to sort of say, this is what we want to be doing. This is why we should move. So we expand on that quite a lot. We've got a captive audience, and we do our selling at that point in the management review piece. And then after that, I actually, again, a bit cheeky, you set the board a challenge. Do we want to be one of the first organisations in the UK to do this? And some of these guys are quite competitive. They want to be part of that, and we get the buy-in and achieve that commitment. But once you've got all these kind of boxes ticked, you're in a really strong position. And of course, I think once you have the gap analysis and you can take that back to the board and say, actually, these are only the things we need to do. There's not a huge amount here, guys. This is not a complete change of our entire system. This is an improvement, on what we have. That's all it is. So it's quite, it's quite important to make sure you approach with your provider and with the board, and make sure that comes together in a very strategic plan.
Yeah, I think to follow up on what Craig's saying there, I think it's a real focus area for us with our clients has been around active implementation. So, your systems are there, whether that's because you've had 18,001 previously, or you have 9,001, or just generally because that's good business practice to have some kind of framework for managing your activities. And the focus is around the active implementation. And I think what we find with clients is they do more than they realize, and it's taking credit for those activities. So there is a wealth of good day-to-day interaction, whether that be between the workforce and the supervisory line management, whether that be risk-based discussions, at senior management level. So it's trying to harness those things that happen organically as part of day-to-day business and taking credit for it, rather than, as Craig was alluding to, it's not this whole rewrite that we have to do. And I think sometimes we're a bit hesitant in kind of, pushing forward those achievements and being proud of those achievements. And that's essentially what you want to be demonstrating to your assessors is, look, this is part of our day-to-day activities. We do this, as a matter of course, not just because we have the auditor coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. Just adding to that, absolutely in agreement. Certainly from the assessor's perspective, we see where there is that open communication, where there has been that gap analysis activity previously, whether that's done externally by us or whether that's done internally or with support. seeing the benefit of that initial, where are we, where's the line in the sand, what additional activities do we need to get after, helps paint the picture for the leadership team. And it also helps support the business understand the additional changes that might not be initially obvious. Certainly from my perspective, we're seeing a lot of organisations who are using this period of change to also undertake an activity like a gap analysis, and we're offering that remotely at the moment. I think it stands a business in good stead to be able to understand its position, support its leadership in making some key decisions strategically.
That was excellent. Craig, that was a really good blueprint for companies about how to move forward, preparing for their audit. And Donna, some excellent insight into your clients and very interesting shout about what you're already doing. Probably some very good advice even beyond auditing. And Suzanne, thank you for bringing up the remote topic, which I think is very important during these times. So if we could move on, the next question is around what the top challenges are that you faced and addressed during your ISO 45001 audits. And Suzanne, if I could start with you on this one, please.
Yes, thanks there. In relation to challenges, I suppose, that the assessor community are feeling or undergoing at the moment, I guess there's working remotely. There's additional challenges that we're facing, obviously trying to tap into keeping that communication maintained, even though we're not physically in all cases on site. Additional challenges that are specific, I suppose, in terms of the occupational health and safety standard would be around ensuring that we're getting appropriate spread of communications, not only through senior leadership, but leadership throughout. It's very important. Key statements within the standard there with regard to leadership, and it's about understanding and the business understanding where their business leaders are, and the assessor being able to communicate with them during the assessment process. We try and have a spread between senior leadership discussions, executive leadership, middle management, but also leaders within the business that maybe don't even acknowledge that they are leaders, supervisors, charge hands. So it's about us finding that balance so that we can engage everybody throughout leadership, but also the worker community in the assessment process.
Yeah, I think management of change, that is probably the single biggest thing at the moment we face. And I guess for the roles that Craig and I fulfill, it's a case of the only constant at the moment is change. So, we've gone through rapid change under the COVID-19 situation to digitalization, remote technology, not having a workforce on our doorstep. How do we look after them? And then, of course, we then have, working with management system assessors, and we go through our Lloyd's audits, and they're like, right, so how are you managing change? And it's like, well, that's all we've done for every day for the last 6 months. So, it's being able to kind of have that ability to step back and say, how do we actually capture this? Because the management system assessors know you're doing it, but obviously you have to be able to demonstrate to them how you have gone through that risk-based thinking and that thought process. So I think that probably has been by far the biggest challenge we have faced is around management of change.
Yeah, it just leading me on from that. I guess we've been fairly fortunate with our audits from 45,001 across the world. So let's say we work in 6 countries. I think we've had about 14 minor non-conformances all told across the piece. So just looking back at our report to see what the key issues there were. You'll understand that a couple of them were on-site unsafe acts, unsafe conditions, which were pretty much remedied at the time. But when we look at the 2 other areas that gave me concern, they come under the new heading, I guess, of performance evaluation. So one is we have a system which is a service improvement delivery system. So if we get a non-conformance, we put it into the system. An action is then electronically tracked to its completion. So there's a lot of expectation that the managers within the business would actually go in there, close out the action, and we just get a report out of the Power BI system, which was the intention. So when we actually looked at that and we actually kicked the tires a little bit harder, when you look at performance evaluation thoroughly, well, actually we go in there and do an actual audit of the system. There's no supporting evidence being added to them, so we're expecting to see, is there a time at which it can be done? Where's the document? If there's been a sign-in sheet, if there's been a presentation, a video, or things like that, that's what we want to see. Our system has the capability to do that. So that was a bit of an eye-opener for us, and I guess what it's done is it's given us a move back towards our policing role again, I guess. So when somebody goes in and says, yeah, I've closed out that document, we now have an extra section on there where my team of administrators will go in there and go, does it have this, 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 and this? Are we satisfied that's been closed, to its conclusion? Because if we don't get that, we're not going to get the improvement we want. There is absolutely no point in that. So I guess, the audits from 45001 have made us really focus on that piece quite intently. And I guess the spin out of that is how we actually move that on to improvement.
Craig, thank you very much. Craig, I'll stick with you on this one. You just mentioned nonconformities. In addition to the raising and resolving of nonconformities, talk to us about how the ASCO group has benefited from ISO 45001 certification.
So I guess there's three things in here, I guess. So the first benefit is the recognition. So we were keen to get the standard as quickly as we possibly could, to give the recognition to our clients, to show that we were a leader in what we want to do, and to set the mark of our standards. So I guess that recognition was one of the first benefits. That obviously came back from the clients. We've always had some positive publicity off the back of that, and some good marketing, I guess. And also our supply chain has actually helped them to realize that they can do these things as well, and help to move them on a piece too. I guess the second benefit, I touched on one of my earlier answers. We operate in 6 countries, so making this legislative compliance internationally much more easy for us. So actually, if we're following and meeting the standard of 45001 in Trinidad and Canada, Australia, etc., then we're almost certainly meeting the legislative requirements of these countries. Now, we don't take that for granted. We obviously check that, and we follow that, but it does help to give us that piece. And then I guess the last part I would it's a bit of a diversion, I guess, but it has improved process. So what we're looking at in terms of process improvement, where we're looking at, there's been a downturn in the industry, there's been all sorts of organizational changes, there's been the COVID pandemic, things like that. So we have to look at our business again. And at the heart of that, absolutely at the heart of that, form our business, and not from the HSEQ department, from the board, is risk and opportunity. What are the risks here? What are the opportunities? What is we need to do? This is now becoming a bit of a mindset. So there's this added benefit that these guys now understand, that the risk is not sitting with HSEQ, it sits with finance, it sits with commercial, it sits with HR, and so on. So it is broadened right out across the business. So that's, I guess, a quick summary of the 3 benefits that we've had from 45001.
Yeah, and I would echo, what Craig's saying, that we see that across a range of clients, particularly where we have clients that have global operations. So if you have, varying operations in different countries, whether that be Australia, in the Caspian region, the US and Canada, the reality is those legislative frameworks are at different stages of maturity and complexity. So by having an international standard, we can measure like for like. So when we're speaking with the senior management team, that they know the results that we're reporting on, whether that's through KPIs, leading lagging indicators, based upon the 45001 framework, that they know, what's being seen in site 1 in one country is equivalent to the next. So it doesn't just then rely on the local regulations. And I think that's where we get a benefit from the likes of Lloyd's Register, is that we build that relationship. So we know that if we're looking at a client who is growing organically or by acquisition globally, that we take Lloyd's on that journey with us. And I think Craig, made the point earlier, it has to be a partnership. It's not master servant. We need that validation and verification that we're doing the right things. And I think, again, it does set the scene with certainly within some sectors of that recognition that, when the invitation to tender comes in with the 55-page health and safety questionnaire, but you've got the standard and you can tick the box. So there are kind of, I guess, financial benefits that are difficult to quantify from a time perspective, and being able to demonstrate that to your client base.
Yeah, and I think you made a point in one of your earlier answers, Donna, that individual companies have somewhat different journeys depending whether they've migrated from 18,001 to 45,001, or whether 45,001 is their first deployment of a OHS management system standard. And I think that comes through in terms of the benefits that are achieved as well. They differ slightly for organizations. Certainly, I think for those who haven't used the standard before, and perhaps for those who have, there's the raising of visibility within the organization, the focusing of attention. I think, Craig, you spoke to that clearly as well, around galvanizing the attention of senior leadership and the support and the resources that takes. I think there's also sometimes an opportunity in moving to a new standard of revisiting some things which perhaps organizationally we've just got used to, we begin to take for granted, and then the standard kind of and the reassessment makes us think, hang on, that's not quite right, is it? Or surely we can do that better. So I think there's a sort of a bit of a jolt in terms of any complacency that's perhaps crept in. And I think perhaps another angle I'd highlight is for those who haven't used the sort of systematic framework of a management system around OHS before. I've experienced it directly myself in assessments, where the feedback has been that there's a bit of a light bulb moment around for perhaps health and safety professionals who have found themselves on occasion drawn into repeated problem fixing and have seen the standard as kind of, there it is, we should be fixing this. You know, my job is to help fix this once and for all, to make sure we get to the root cause and fix a problem once, as opposed to, you know, running around continually refixing the same issues. So I think the benefits can be, you know, depend where you are on that journey, really.
Martin, Donna, and Craig, excellent insight into the benefits of having a certified ISO 45001 management system. Thank you. And Martin, I'm going to stick with you if I could. And if you could walk us through what are the key elements of ISO 45001?
Okay, thank you, Alex. I'll try not to make a pitch for every single clause and leave others to speak to their favourite clauses. I'll just speak to two, if I may. First of all, I'll make a plea for definitions. They're right at the front of the standard, and most people speedily turn past those pages to get to what they see as the meat of the document and go straight to clause 4 for the requirements. And I can understand that. But there's an awful lot of work goes into those definitions for a very good reason. And it is often useful to spend a little bit of time making sure that the term that you understand as a user, what the terms are intended to mean in the context of the document. If the term is being used in the normal dictionary meaning, there isn't a definition. And so if there is a definition, it sort of implies there's a special message here. There's something we need the user to know about the way that term's being used. So I just dropped that in as a attempt for you to turn back a few pages and have a look at section 3. But the area I really want to make a pitch for as being a key element is something which wasn't strongly highlighted in 18,001, and that's the section on context, where the organization is asked to make sure that it considers and understands the internal and external context in which it's trying to make the management system work and to be effective. So that's the sort of external business environment, the regulatory environment, and many other aspects of that, and the internal things around culture, for example, and also thinking about the needs and the expectations of interested parties, workers obviously being a key interested party, but many others, regulators, customers, suppliers, a parent company. There can be many interested parties whose views need to be factored in. And to me, what all of that is saying is the management system that emerges from the application of the standard in a given organisation has to be uniquely specific to that organisation. That old-fashioned idea of sort of cookie cutter management systems where you could take somebody else's and paste your own name in, well, no, that's absolutely what the context section of this of 45001 is telling you to avoid. The management system is a risk management tool for the business, and that means you have to customize it to the risks that are particular to you and that you need to manage.
Yeah, I would echo what Martin's saying there, and actually in previous discussions I've had with Martin, you know, he made a really good sort of statement saying, you know, the management system is a risk control measure. So I think what organisations, and particularly health and safety kind of practitioners, need to understand is for businesses and organisations to grow and expand and achieve whatever their objectives are to achieve, there is an element of risk there. So this is not kind of the traditional health and safety, as low as reasonably practical, eliminate all risk going. This is more about looking at risk in the wider context, as Craig alluded to, where you have the likes of finance, commercial, IT, you know, the different functions in an organisation, you know, engaging in that risk conversation, and health and safety is part of that. So, you know, understanding the context and scale of the activities that you're undertaking and that your scope undertakes. And I think Martin's right, you know, the number of times we inherit clients that have, you know, global corporate management systems, and there's maybe about 15 of them on one site, and actually they do what they do really well, but they're just drowning in paperwork. So I think it's far more about moving away from that traditional, got to have something documented for every activity. No, you have to be able to demonstrate control over your processes. And I think particularly now with more of a move to digital and technology, it's being a bit more open to how you demonstrate. So certainly we found with the standards, they're less prescriptive. You know, there's less of the thou shall have a document for this. It's a case of saying, you know, you need to assess the risk, and you need to demonstrate the controls that are in place relevant to the risk that you face, and that you can do what you say you do and demonstrate that to the assessor. So I think that may be a bit of a challenge to the health and safety sort of community, because it's kind of forcing a bit more of a wider thinking. But it's a good challenge to have, and I think without a doubt, what we've seen with people embrace that challenge is that actually it integrates health and safety into the business far better, and it becomes far more of the day-to-day thinking than it's sitting in a box on its own, you know, as a necessary evil.
Yeah, I agree with that entirely, Donna. And I guess from my perspective, I've already touched on two of the clauses already. So we talked about performance evaluation and improvement. So just look at a couple of the others then. So if we think about the planning clause, I mean, I think that is has been super important. So we got 45001, you know, very early on, and I guess, you know, this downturn in the industry, you know, the effect on the business, thinking about how we operate, how we plan, how we do things, it has really helped to sort of give that, you know, new risk identification process, as opposed to, oh damn, there's another risk come up, you know. So we're actually, I've got this risk-based thinking approach now in the business going forward through the planning process. And again, just expanding on what Donna said, that it's exactly what we're saying. So that risk-based thinking process is not just in health and safety. It's from the board, it's from each department, and from each service stream. And I guess from that, what I have seen as well is in terms of clause 7, in terms of the support, you know, how have we improved our systems, our networks, our resourcing, our engagement with the clients, and all these have been challenged through this pandemic. You can imagine, you know, all the things that we want to do to support our organization, you know, how do we support somebody who's now working at home? You know, so we have to think about that, again, going back to the risk-based approach and making sure that we've got everything there. We've just completed a whole new management of change system, Donna, you'll be pleased to hear, because we had to react and respond to that challenge. So this is the type of resources that people want in the business. A simple, easy to use, easy to follow management of change system. So that support network and resourcing it, making sure it's easy, it's available, it's remote, you know, and it's international. You know, so each of these kind of clauses, and I guess there only is one other one, which is the operation of the management system, from the other clauses, but each of these all sort of knit together really, really nicely to give us this continuous improvement. And if the management system is applied effectively and it's been bought into and there's the commitment, and as I said before, you generate that culture, the systems work, the processes work, and it's a much, much slicker operation that you have as a result of what you're doing.
Craig, thank you very much. I think if anyone was taking notes here, they have a pretty good overview on what ISO 45001 is all about. So if we could move on, we're going to talk about now how easy it is to integrate ISO 45001 with other management systems. And Suzanne, I'm going to start with you on this one, if I could, please.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think in terms of that integration piece, I think if your system is existing already in line with the structure of Annex SL, then it's a straightforward process. There are some challenges, there are some reviews that need to happen, but again, it's back to that context analysis and how you knit the requirements all together. Should be straightforward though, Annex SL.
Yeah, Annex SL, risk-based thinking. All I would do is repeat what Suzanne said, so I'm just going to echo it instead.
I took a bit of a straw poll actually around the assessor community, just asking that question, and some of the clients I've had recently, and everybody was answering the same. The structure of Annex SL really just provides the structure that you need for your overall integrated management system.
Yeah, I think it's really important, don't reinvent the wheel unnecessarily. There's been some really good work by the ISO committees to simplify these things. So, why make it any more difficult for yourself when there is a framework there that does it for you?
Yeah, and also I concur with the previous speakers on that. I mean, it is easy to do, if you have already got existing standards. So we have 9001, 2015 and 14001. So the structure is already there for that. What I would say, it is easy. It's not a difficult process. Nobody should be afraid of it, and you should not shy away from doing that. But be prepared to do some work though. It is easy, but it is time consuming. You do have to put in some legwork. You have to do it back and review your systems. There's a bit of effort required. It's not just a case of flick the switch from one to the next. There is some work to be done, but don't be daunted by it. It is not difficult. It is pretty straightforward.
Okay, so moving on, ISO 45001 was finalized in 2018, which is it's obviously a very different world we're living in today. Martin, can you start us off and talk about how the ISO 45001 framework is positioned to manage emerging risks?
Okay, thank you, Alex. Well, I think the first thing I'd say about that is the framework is there to help organizations to develop capability. And that means that they have a capability that is then available to deploy in changing circumstances. I mean, Donna's, Craig have spoken quite a lot about management of change. The world is changing around us. And I think those questions you sometimes hear about, well, how many organizations had an emergency plan prepared for a pandemic, slightly misses the point, which is that organizations have developed capability around emergency planning through the use of the 45001 framework. And they've thought about the organizational structures that they need to deploy when an unexpected situation arises, and how to mobilize to deal with the situation, and established roles and responsibilities, how to communicate and all those things. And it's that capability which means that you're not moving from a standing start when a new and unexpected issue emerges. So in some ways, the framework is there to help organizations be prepared for the unexpected. But of course, speaking from the Standards Committee perspective, of course, we're very aware that the world of work is changing at pace. Many listeners will be aware that one of the first items of work that the technical committee kicked off when it was founded a couple of years ago was the development of ISO 45003 on psychological health and safety in the workplace. And that standard has now reached what's called Draft International Standard stage, or DIS, and is out for international ballot. That ballot closes in November of this year, and subject to a favourable ballot result, comments received will then be worked into the document, and hopefully we remain on track to publish around about the middle of next year. Another area, of course, where we've been active as a standards committee is in relation to the pandemic itself, and many of you may well be aware that we are currently developing an ISO PAS with the number 45005, which specifically provides guidance around safe working in the pandemic. So it is part of the role of the Standards Committee to provide additional guidance to help organisations in their application of ISO 45001.
Yeah, I would add to that the framework that Mark's talking about there from 45001. I think I've alluded to it in my previous answers about how it's actually helping the whole business to think about risk, in the round. So when it does come to the world that we live in now, where things are almost thrown up in the air quite quickly, and we're living through a pandemic right now where the framework of our business continuity plans, our ability to get a crisis management team together very quickly globally, to make sure we communicate with our business and things like that. The framework for that has helped enormously. So we were very fortunate that we were kind of prepared for emergency response. But for one this big, that long, as Donna alluded to earlier, this has been a moving feast for us. So we don't know whether we're in lockdown or what the new rules are, or what the Scottish government's saying against the UK government, or what's happening overseas. So there's been quite a lot of reaction and change to that. And I guess what I would offer up as well is that it's not just about our ability to react and respond to a pandemic. So if we applied the same principles of the framework, perhaps to security, to the climate emergencies that are coming. So these are genuine risks that are coming. I know there's other standards that cover these areas, but if you take the framework for 45001 and it can apply that in its principles, then you are in a pretty good standing for what you want to be doing. So in the middle of this pandemic, we are working on our environmental management policy, using the same outlines as the framework that we have here. So there are additional benefits from that, that can be applied, and other different types of scenarios that we have, it helps us to consider much broader risk. And I guess going back to, I think the point you made earlier, Martin, about the context of the organisation, we were always looking inwards. What is the risk to our business? Actually, let's look outwards. What is there to help us? What's there to support us? What are the risks, the challenges, the opportunities, the benefits that can be gained? And I feel, now more so than ever, that's the footing that our organisation has, and I'm pretty sure it'll be the same footing that others who with 45001 will have as well.
Great, thank you very much. So that's all the time we had for our panelist questions. Thank you for your insight and expertise. And now let's spend the last few minutes we've got. Let's see if we can pick up some audience questions. If I could, Martin, if I could start with you, I'm going to try and combine two questions here, Martin, if you'll follow me along here. The first one of those asks about the new risks and hazards about working from home and how 45001 helps that. And then if you could also pick up the second half of another question, which would be, how is ISO 45001 addressing the mental health issue? If I could ask you to pick up both of those in your answer.
Well, Alex, yes, working from home's become a major part of many people's lives, of course, in recent times. And I think many organisations have been grateful that that was possible, but have needed to recognise or begin to recognise now that this isn't a temporary phenomenon. It's going to be with us for quite some time. And so I think for many organisations, there wasn't too much concern in the early stages about people perhaps squeezed into the corner of the kitchen table or trying to work with the domestic distractions around them. But obviously now we're seeing this as a long-term issue. Then it's time to catch up and apply proper OHS thinking to that, and many organisations are now doing that. And of course they've got to address in doing that both the physical aspects of the workplace in order to make sure that people are working in an ergonomic way and that the right attention is given to height adjustable chairs and lighting levels and so on, but also The psychological aspects of working from home are important as well. It is a quite different experience, as many of us know. There can be a degree of isolation that can easily feed into a degree of insecurity. And I think probably for many people, time management and so on is one of the biggest challenges. And you might think I'm going to say too little work, but actually I think for many people it's too much work, and the ability to switch off and detach and disengage and therefore to have the time for their own health and well-being. So I think organisations need to consider all of those things with one thing in mind, perhaps above all else, which is that people are individuals and that individual circumstances differ, and what works for one person may not work at all for somebody else. And I think one of the benefits, if you can put it that way, of the way the world of work has changed in the last 6 months is that many organisations now have a much keener focus on the issues around mental health and well-being for their employees. And I think the really positive thing is that some of the traditional stigma associated with those discussions has evaporated, and that's long overdue and a very positive development. So it's very timely really for us that ISO 45003 is in development and at quite a well advanced stage, because it's there to help organisations to put that structured framework around the way they consider employee mental health. So I think that's an important area for all organisations to focus on.
Martin, thank you very much. Interesting when you said the word ergonomic. I think all the other panelists sat up straight. So if we can move on to Donna. Donna, I'll pick up the next question with you. And this question from the audience is, how has COVID-19 impacted how we manage health and safety at work? And is ISO 45001 an effective mechanism to do this?
Yeah, so I think there's probably a couple of key themes that I would focus on that. And firstly, what I would say is, COVID-19 is a new hazard or risk. So we are used to dealing with hazard and risk. We have legal frameworks pretty much globally around duty of care. So it's not, it's new, but it's not completely unknown. It's about how we deal with that, and I think that's a key focus for people. I would echo what Martin has said. Psychosocial. So that for me is a big consideration. It's very easy if you've got a workshop to go and do a hazard hunt, to go and spot physical hazards and conditions. How do you do that with a remote working community? I think as Martin said, it's becoming less stigmatized, but how do you have that conversation to just say, are you okay? Are you doing okay? And what happens if the person says no? How do you deal with that, and how do you then action upon that? So I think that's an area that's a challenge. And I think the other area is this globalization versus nationalization argument that we will wait and see. So we work with a lot of companies that operate worldwide. It is nothing to jump on a plane and be in another country, the next day to do what you need to do. And that's turned on its head. I would spend at least 2-3 times a year in our Australian office. I have no idea when Western Australia will open its borders and I will be allowed in. Realistically, probably middle of 2021. So I think that's the challenge about how do you deal with that, particularly if you've got emergency situations, instant management situations. And it's again about having a strong team. And as Craig said, using the external resources available to you to manage the best you can. We are all human in this. Nobody has all the answers. So we need to cut ourselves a little bit of slack in how we approach these things.
Donna, excellent. Thank you very much. We've got time for one more question. So I'll pick a question that we can ask both Craig and Suzanne. So if we go with this one right here, having successfully transitioned, Craig, you've transitioned from OSAS 18001 to ISO 45001. Craig, can you provide us from a client side advice and tips you can offer? You've answered this question earlier, so you can recap that. And then Suzanne, if you could follow that from a Lloyd's Register side, offer some of your insight.
Yeah, so yeah, as you say, Alex, I did mention a few of these parts earlier, but it's worth just summarising. I think you know, the key for us has always been the partnership, you know, with Lloyd's Register. You know, I guess a top tip would be, don't think about changing your provider, you know, when you're actually going to go through the migration process. That is not the time to start thinking about your providers. That's a really bad move to be doing that. I guess the other part is to engage with your stakeholders. Well, so I guess identify the stakeholders you need to talk to and engage with them properly. You know, be absolutely honest with what it is the company is trying to achieve. Now, our stakeholder base is far and wide, as you'd imagine. So I took the opportunity, as I explained earlier, to use the management review meeting as an area where we have all the right people in the right room at the right time to use that piece to do the engagement. I guess it depends on your own management style as well and where you are in the journey. We've talked about the maturity of management systems already. But you know, whether you're a good salesman or not, you really do have to sell it to the board. You know, what you want to do. You have to show them the benefits that this is going to bring to the organisation. And I think we've explained through this whole session, you know, that it's much wider than just a health and safety management system. It's much broader for the business. So taking some of the things that you've heard from today, for example, and using them as examples of how you would actually sell that to your business. And a couple of quick things, I guess. Achieve the commitment, you know. So one of the things we did was to get the senior management commitment was, we're going to do the transition. We've got the gap analysis done. I need you guys to, you know, do the opening meetings and the close-out meetings. Can you give me a firm date in your calendar now? And we got that. That commitment was huge. That was almost like the turning point of moving it from me over to the board. You know, so actually, so when we have the opening meetings, you know, and I think it was Ron who came to see us at the time. He came in, he was like, you're sitting talking to the board. He's like, my word, you know, this is a change, you know, because sometimes they were flitting in now because they're very busy people, but actually that commitment was superb. So getting that commitment is really important. Two other quick things I'll just throw in just before I hand over to Susanna. So one, I would be very wary of any organizations who are telling you they can do this for you quickly. You know, there may be people advertising the internet saying we can have 45,001, you know, over a period of time. Just, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. You know, just go with a recognized provider and make sure you've got that professional support that you need. And last but not least, and Donna touched on this earlier, be prepared to celebrate the success. Don't be afraid to think, actually, when we get this, we're going to say, well done, guys. We're going to have, you know, a bit of a celebration. We're going to do some marketing and publicity of this. Think about what the end goal is going to look like and make sure that everybody who's been involved in that process enjoys the celebration at the end as well. It really is important.
Great, thanks, Craig. Yeah, just, you know, feeding on from that, I suppose, in terms of what I've seen where businesses have been successful in terms of that move over to 45,001. Like I was said earlier, touching on what Craig mentioned there, gap analysis, that was a key one. Like I say, I've got one of those tomorrow, actually, conducted remotely, and a lot of clients are taking advantage of the time. From an assessor's perspective, we're looking to see that robust context analysis has been done. If a business understands its issues, if it understands its interested parties, their needs and expectations, knows where the worries are, knows where the opportunities are, it feeds very much into that whole risk profiling of the business and the analysis of risk and opportunities, helps put together a solid action plan for managing those occupational health and safety risks. And really that's, from an assessor's perspective, what we would be looking to see. Leadership commitment, obviously we would be having those kind of discussions, but also recognising where the leaders are within the business. Like I mentioned earlier, if we're looking at senior leadership, those are usually quite well defined, known, understood, but it's levels of business leaders throughout that we'd be looking to engage, and that engagement is expanded on and into the worker community, making sure that we can access key people and you know, understand their needs and expectations. Does that tie back in with the overall analysis that's been done? So yeah, I think, and just kind of finish off touching there what Craig had mentioned about celebrating the successes, it's very important to acknowledge the work that's done in developing an integrated management system, about approaching a new standard, and this 45,001 has come about developing on from a non-international standard. So, you know, for an organisation to approach it, I think that's really important to celebrate the win.
Great. Suzanne, Craig, thank you both very much. I'd like to thank all the panelists for their contributions today. Unfortunately, we didn't get time to ask any other questions. to answer any other questions, excuse me, but any questions that we haven't been able to answer today will be answered directly to the person asking the question by one of our technical teams. Now, normally at this time, I would step back and tell you a little bit about Lloyd's Register, but I think in this case, I think Donna and Craig have done my job for me, and that's always the most powerful message, is when you have a client who is willing to stand up and say what value your work brings to them. So I thank Craig and Donna very much. Susanna, Martin, thank you also very much for everything you've contributed to this webinar today. I'll close by saying, if you'd like some more information about Lloyd's Register, please visit www.lr.org. And Donna, if you would like to provide a web address where people could find more information about Quench, please do so.
Yeah, so you can find Quench HSEQ Specialist on LinkedIn or www.quench, spelled Quensh, specialists.co.uk or .com.au.
And Craig, how about if we want to find out some more information about the ASCO group, where would we go?
Yeah, sure. As with Donna, ASCO Group has a pretty full LinkedIn page, and if you want to go to visit our external website, is ascoworld.com. And again, if you've got any questions directly for me, it's craig.hunter@ascoworld.com.
Good. Close it off just by saying I don't think you'll find a better group of panelists with more technical expertise, insight, and passion than you've seen today. I've truly enjoyed this session, and thank you all very much for your time and contributions.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you.